So this happened last month, and I'm still processing everything. I was supposed to get married 3 weeks ago to my fiancée Sarah. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and I thought I knew her completely. The wedding was planned, families were excited, and I was counting down the days. Then her bachelorette party happened. What I discovered that night didn't just end our relationship. It made me question everything I thought I knew about trust and love. The worst part wasn't even what she did. It was how confident she was that I'd never find out, and how many people were helping her keep the secret. Sometimes the person you're closest to is the one hiding the biggest lies. So I'm David, 29, groomed to be. Well, I was supposed to be anyway. I work in marketing for a tech startup downtown, pretty standard office job with decent people. Sarah and I met through mutual friends at a house party 4 years ago, and she seemed perfect for me. She was funny, ambitious, worked in graphic design, and we just clicked immediately. The engagement happened last fall. I proposed at the restaurant where we had our first official date. Nothing too fancy, but meaningful to us. Both our families were thrilled, especially her mom, who immediately started planning everything. Sarah wanted a spring wedding, so we set the date for May 15th. Everything felt right. Our relationship had its ups and downs like any couple, but nothing major. We lived together for 2 years, split bills fairly, rarely fought about serious stuff. She had her girls' nights. I had my poker games with the guys. We trusted each other completely, or at least I thought we did. The bachelorette party was planned for the weekend before our wedding. Sarah's maid of honor, Jessica, organized everything. Dinner, then hitting some bars downtown. I was having my bachelor party the same night. Just drinks and pool at Murphy's pub with my college buddies. Nothing crazy, we're all pretty low-key guys. I remember feeling excited that week. Final preparations were done, families were arriving in town, and everything seemed perfect. Sarah seemed a little stressed, but I figured that was normal pre-wedding nerves. Looking back now, I realized she was acting differently, but at the time I just attributed it to wedding planning pressure. The evening started normally enough. I met up with my 5 closest friends at Murphy's around 7. The place was pretty busy for a Thursday night. Typical crowd of office workers unwinding and college kids starting their weekend early. We grabbed our usual table in the back corner where it was quieter. My best man Mike bought the first round and made a toast about finally tying me down. Everyone laughed, and we settled into our normal routine. Pool, darts, talking about work and sports. Nothing too wild since we all had to work the next day. Around 9, I started getting texts from some of Sarah's friends who weren't at the bachelorette party. Her coworker Amanda sent me a message asking if I knew what bar they were hitting. I told her they started at Rosario's for dinner, then were bar hopping downtown. She said she might try to meet up with them later. That's when things got weird. My friend Jake came back from the bathroom looking uncomfortable. He sat down and asked if Sarah's party was definitely downtown. I confirmed it was, and he said he thought he saw her at some club across town when he was getting cigarettes from his car. I told him it was probably someone else. Sarah doesn't really do the club scene anyway. But then Amanda texted again 20 minutes later. She said she'd been to 3 bars downtown looking for them and couldn't find the group anywhere. She asked if I was sure about their plans. I started feeling uneasy but tried to play it off. Maybe they changed venues or went somewhere more private. Mike noticed I was checking my phone constantly and asked what was up. I explained the situation and he shrugged it off. He said bachelorette parties always end up going off script, and Sarah was probably just having fun with her girls. The other guys agreed and told me to stop worrying. I tried to focus on the game, but more weird texts kept coming. Another friend of Sarah's, Kelly, sent me a message around 10:30 saying she'd heard from someone that the bachelorette party had gotten pretty wild. She didn't give details, just said she hoped Sarah was being careful. When I asked what she meant, she said she'd probably heard wrong and to forget about it. The guys kept telling me I was overthinking everything. Tom said his wife's bachelorette party had been completely different from what they'd planned, and it all worked out fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah hadn't texted me once all evening, which was unusual. She normally checked in when she was out with friends. Around 11, Jake got a call from his girlfriend Lisa. After he hung up, he looked really uncomfortable again. He said Lisa had heard some rumors about Sarah's party from her friend who worked at one of the downtown clubs. He wouldn't tell me what exactly, just that maybe I should call Sarah and check in. I tried calling her twice, but it went straight to voicemail. Her phone was either dead or turned off. Jessica didn't answer either. I was starting to panic, but trying not to show it in front of my friends. They kept reassuring me that everything was fine, that bachelorette parties were supposed to be crazy, and that I was just having pre-wedding jitters. But the rumors kept coming. By midnight, 3 different people had texted me asking if I knew what was happening with Sarah's party. Nobody would give me straight answers, just vague comments about things getting out of hand. I decided to call it a night and head home. Maybe Sarah would be back by then and could explain what was going on. I got back to our apartment around 12:30, hoping Sarah would be there with some funny stories about the night. The place was dark and empty. Her car wasn't in the parking lot either. I checked my phone again, still no messages from her. I tried calling Jessica one more time and actually got through. She sounded drunk and was clearly at some loud place with music pumping in the background. When I asked where they were, she was evasive. She said they were just having fun and that Sarah was fine. I asked to talk to Sarah, but Jessica said she was in the bathroom and would call me later. The whole conversation felt off. Jessica was normally pretty straightforward with me, but she was being weird and secretive. She kept saying everything was great and not to worry, but her tone suggested otherwise. Before I could ask more questions, she said she had to go and hung up. I sat on the couch trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to drive around downtown looking for them, but that seemed crazy and possessive. Another part of me wanted to call Sarah's mom, but that would definitely cause drama if nothing was actually wrong. I decided to wait it out and see if Sarah came home. I turned on Netflix but couldn't focus on anything. Every car that drove by made me check the window. I kept refreshing social media to see if anyone had posted anything from the party, but there was nothing. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message just said to check my email, that someone thought I should see something. I was suspicious it might be spam, but given everything else that was happening, I checked anyway. There was an email from the same unknown number with a video file attached. The sender said they were at the same place as Sarah's party and thought I deserved to know what was happening. They said they were sorry and hoped they were doing the right thing. My hands were shaking as I downloaded the video. It was clearly taken on someone's phone in a dimly lit bar or club. The quality wasn't great, but I could definitely make out Sarah in the center of the frame. She was dancing very close with some guy I'd never seen before. That alone wouldn't have been a huge deal. People dance at bachelorette parties. But then the video continued. Sarah and this guy were making out pretty heavily. His hands were all over her, and she was clearly into it. The video was only about 30 seconds long, but it was enough to make me feel sick. This wasn't just innocent fun or too many drinks. This was my fiancé, 3 days before our wedding, hooking up with a random guy. I watched the video 3 more times, hoping I was wrong about what I was seeing. Maybe it wasn't actually Sarah. Maybe the lighting was playing tricks. But I knew her too well. It was definitely her, wearing the same dress she'd shown me earlier that day. I tried calling her again, but got voicemail. I sent a text asking where she was and when she'd be home. No response. I forwarded the video to my phone and watched it again. The timestamp showed it was taken around 11:30, so this had happened recently. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I confront her immediately when she got home? Should I wait until morning when we were both sober? Should I call off the wedding right now? My mind was racing with questions and worst-case scenarios. Around 3:30, I heard Sarah's key in the door. She came in trying to be quiet, clearly drunk. When she saw me sitting on the couch, she seemed surprised. She asked why I was still awake, and I said I'd been worried about her since she hadn't called or texted. She apologized and said her phone had died early in the evening. She claimed they'd had dinner, gone to a couple of bars, and then ended up at Jessica's place watching movies. She said it was a pretty tame night overall, nothing too crazy. She seemed nervous while telling me this, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with her purse. I wanted to show her the video right then, but something held me back. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe I wanted to see how much she would lie to me. I asked if she'd had fun, and she said it was nice to spend time with the girls before the wedding. She said she was tired and wanted to go to bed. I barely slept that night. Sarah passed out immediately, but I kept staring at the ceiling thinking about that video. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. Sarah woke up around 10 with a hangover. She was quieter than usual, claiming she didn't remember much from the night before. She said the girls had gotten her pretty drunk and everything was kind of a blur. When I asked about specific details, she was vague and said she'd have to ask Jessica what exactly they did. I decided to test her. I mentioned that Amanda had been looking for them downtown and couldn't find the group. Sarah looked confused for a second, then said they must have missed each other in the crowd. She said they'd definitely been downtown most of the night. But I knew from the video that wasn't true. The background looked like one of those upscale clubs on the north side of town, nowhere near the downtown bars Amanda had been checking. Sarah was lying to my face about where she'd been. After she left for work, I called Mike to talk through what had happened. I forwarded him the video and asked for his honest opinion. He was quiet for a long time after watching it. Finally, he said it definitely looked bad, but maybe there was more to the story. He suggested I try to get more information before making any big decisions. I spent the day trying to focus on work, but I kept checking my phone hoping for some explanation that would make sense of everything. Sarah texted me around lunch asking if I wanted to grab dinner and go over final wedding details. She seemed to be acting completely normal, like nothing had happened. That evening at dinner, I brought up the Bachelorette party again. I asked if she'd had fun dancing, and she said they'd mostly just sat around talking. When I mentioned that someone had told me the party got pretty wild, she laughed and said whoever told me that was probably thinking of a different group. She was gaslighting me, making me feel like I was crazy for having concerns. Every question I asked, she had a reasonable-sounding answer for. But I could tell she was being careful with her words, thinking before she spoke in a way that wasn't natural for her. When we got home, Sarah went to take a shower. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I made a decision I'm not proud of. I checked her messages, something I'd never done before in our entire relationship. Most of her recent texts were normal, family members asking about wedding details, work stuff, conversations with friends about other topics. But there was a group chat with Jessica and 2 other bridesmaids that made my stomach drop. The messages from that morning were Jessica asking if everyone was okay and if they were all on the same page about what happened. One of the bridesmaids, Rachel, said she felt terrible about the whole situation. Another bridesmaid, Megan, said they needed to make sure their stories matched if I asked questions. Jessica had written that Sarah was handling it well and that I didn't suspect anything. She said as long as everyone stuck to the plan, everything would be fine. Rachel responded that she didn't feel right lying to me, and Jessica told her it would just hurt everyone if the truth came out now. The most damaging message was from Sarah herself, sent that afternoon. She said she thought I might be getting suspicious and asked everyone to be extra careful about what they said. She wrote that the wedding was too close to risk everything falling apart over one stupid night. Reading those messages felt like getting punched in the stomach. Not only had Sarah cheated on me, but she was actively coordinating a cover-up with multiple people. They were all lying to protect her, treating me like I was too stupid to figure out what had happened. I took screenshots of the conversation and sent them to myself, then deleted the evidence from her sent folder. When Sarah came out of the shower, I pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was furious and heartbroken at the same time. The next day was Tuesday, 3 days before our wedding. I called in sick to work because I couldn't concentrate on anything. I needed to talk to someone I trusted, so I asked Mike to meet me for coffee during his lunch break. We met at a quiet cafe near his office. I showed him the screenshots of the group chat, and his expression got more serious as he read through them. He said it was clear that Sarah had cheated and was now lying about it. He asked what I wanted to do. I told him I was thinking about confronting Sarah directly and demanding the truth. Mike said that might work, but based on how she'd been acting, she'd probably just deny everything and make me feel crazy. He suggested I try to get more evidence first, so she couldn't wiggle out of it. That afternoon, I decided to call Rachel, the bridesmaid who seemed most uncomfortable with the lying. I'd always gotten along well with her, and she'd seemed genuinely conflicted in the group chat messages. I called her around 4 and said I wanted to ask her about the Bachelorette party. I kept my tone casual, like I was just curious about how it went. Rachel immediately got nervous and started giving me the same story Sarah had told. Dinner downtown, a few bars, nothing too exciting. But when I pressed for details, she started contradicting herself. First she said they'd gone to 3 bars, then she said it was only 2. She couldn't remember the names of the places they'd been to. When I asked if Sarah had talked to any guys that night, Rachel paused for way too long before saying no. I decided to be more direct. I told Rachel that I'd heard some rumors about the party getting wild, and I just wanted to know if Sarah was okay. Rachel got quiet and said she didn't know what rumors I was talking about. Then I played my card. I said someone had sent me a video from that night, and I was hoping she could help me understand what had happened. Rachel immediately started crying. She said she'd felt terrible about the whole situation and didn't want to lie to me anymore. She told me that Sarah had gotten very drunk early in the evening. They'd gone to a club on the north side where Sarah had started dancing with some guy she'd met at the bar. Rachel said she'd tried to intervene, but Sarah had told her to back off and let her have fun. According to Rachel, Sarah and this guy had been all over each other for most of the night. They'd made out on the dance floor, and at one point they'd disappeared together for about 20 minutes. Rachel said she'd been worried and had gone looking for them, but Jessica had told her to leave it alone. Rachel said Jessica had been encouraging Sarah the whole time, saying it was her last night of freedom and she should enjoy herself. The other bridesmaids had been uncomfortable, but Jessica was the maid of honor and they'd followed her lead. When I asked about the cover-up, Rachel broke down completely. She said Jessica had convinced everyone that telling me would just hurt me unnecessarily since it was a one-time thing that didn't mean anything. Jessica had argued that Sarah loved me and was going to be a good wife, so why ruin everything over one drunken mistake? But Rachel said she'd been losing sleep over it. She said she'd been planning to talk to me before the wedding because she didn't think it was fair for me to go into marriage without knowing the truth. I thanked Rachel for being honest with me and asked her not to tell the others that we'd talked. She agreed and apologized again for not speaking up sooner. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time trying to process everything. Now I had confirmation from multiple sources that Sarah had cheated on me. I had video evidence and text messages showing the cover-up. The question was what to do with this information. The wedding was in 3 days. Family members were flying in from across the country, and we'd already paid for everything. That night, Sarah came home excited about some last-minute wedding details. She'd picked up her dress from Final Alterations and wanted to show me how perfect everything looked. Watching her act so happy and normal while knowing what I knew was torture. She talked about how excited she was to marry me, how perfect our life was going to be, how lucky she felt to have found her soulmate. Every word felt like a knife. She was either a sociopath or completely delusional about what she'd done. I went to bed early, claiming I was tired from wedding stress. Sarah stayed up late on her laptop, probably coordinating more lies with her bridesmaids. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there. But another part of me was curious to see how far she'd take the deception. Would she actually walk down the aisle and marry me while hiding the secret? Would she look me in the eye and say her vows knowing what she'd done? The next morning was Wednesday. Sarah left early for a final dress fitting with her mom and sisters. I used the time alone to think through my options. Option 1 was to confront Sarah privately and give her a chance to come clean. Maybe if she was honest and showed genuine remorse, we could work through it with counseling. But based on her behavior so far, I didn't think she'd tell the truth even if caught red-handed. Option 2 was to call off the wedding quietly and deal with the fallout privately. We could tell everyone we'd realized we weren't ready for marriage, and I could avoid the public humiliation of explaining what really happened. Option 3 was to expose everything publicly and let everyone know exactly why I was calling off the wedding. This felt like the nuclear option, but part of me was angry enough to consider it. I called Mike again to talk through my options. He said he'd support whatever decision I made, but he thought I deserved better than someone who would cheat on me and then lie about it so easily. He said the fact that she was willing to marry me while keeping this secret showed she didn't really love me the way I deserved to be loved. That afternoon, Mike came over to help me think through everything. He said he'd been doing some research and had found out more about the guy Sarah had hooked up with. Apparently, he was a regular at that club and had a reputation for hooking up with engaged and married women. This wasn't some random drunken mistake. Sarah had chosen to get involved with someone who specifically targeted women in relationships. Mike said he thought I should expose everything, not just for my own sake, but to warn other people about what Sarah and Jessica were capable of. He said they'd coordinated this cover-up so smoothly that it probably wasn't their first time helping each other cheat and lie. That evening, Sarah came home glowing from her dress fitting. She said everything was perfect and she couldn't wait for Saturday. She asked if I was getting excited, and I said I was looking forward to finally knowing the truth about our relationship. She gave me a weird look and asked what I meant by that. I said I just meant that marriage would bring us closer together and we'd have no more secrets from each other. She nodded and said she felt the same way, that she was ready to be completely open and honest as my wife. The irony was incredible. She was talking about honesty while actively maintaining one of the biggest lies possible. I realized then that I couldn't marry someone who could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly. I told Mike I'd made my decision. I was going to let Sarah think everything was fine until the wedding rehearsal on Friday night. Then I'd expose everything in front of both families and all the wedding party. It felt harsh, but I wanted everyone to see who they'd been supporting and defending. Mike said he'd have my back no matter what happened. He said he'd already talked to a couple of our other friends, and they were all ready to support me when the truth came out. That made me feel less alone in all of this. Friday evening arrived faster than I expected. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for 6 o'clock at the banquet hall, followed by dinner at 7:30. Both families had flown in, Sarah's relatives from California and mine from Texas. Everyone was excited and happy, talking about how perfect Sarah and I were together. I'd spent the day preparing what I was going to say and making sure I had all my evidence ready. I transferred the video to a USB drive and had screenshots of the text messages saved on my phone. Mike had helped me figure out how to connect my laptop to the banquet hall's projector system. Sarah was glowing all day, getting her nails done and spending time with her out-of-town relatives. She kept texting me about how excited she was and how perfect everything was going to be. Reading those messages while knowing what I was about to do made me feel sick, but I knew I couldn't go through with a marriage built on lies. The rehearsal started normally. The wedding coordinator walked us through the processional, where everyone would stand, and the basic flow of the ceremony. Sarah's hand was shaking a little when she took mine, which I initially thought was nerves. Looking back, I wonder if she was starting to suspect something. Jessica was playing her role as maid of honor perfectly, acting supportive and excited. She kept making jokes about finally getting me tied down and how lucky Sarah was to have found such a good guy. The hypocrisy was unbelievable. After we'd run through the ceremony twice, the coordinator said we were ready for dinner. Everyone started moving toward the dining room, chatting and laughing. This was my moment. I asked everyone to wait for just a minute because I wanted to say something before dinner. Sarah looked at me curiously, probably expecting some romantic speech about how excited I was to marry her tomorrow. I walked over to where Mike had set up my laptop and connected it to the projector. The screen came down and everyone gathered around, expecting maybe a slideshow of photos or a video message. I started by saying that I'd learned some things recently that I needed to share with everyone before we went any further with the wedding plans. Sarah's face went pale immediately. Jessica stepped closer to her, and I could see them exchanging worried glances. I said that 3 nights ago, during Sarah's bachelorette party, some things had happened that everyone deserved to know about. I explained that I'd received some information that had made me question whether Sarah and I should actually get married. Sarah immediately started protesting, saying she didn't know what I was talking about and that nothing had happened at her bachelorette party. She looked around at her family for support, and her mom stepped forward asking what was going on. That's when I played the video. The room went completely silent as everyone watched Sarah making out with another man on the dance floor. You could hear people gasping and whispering. Sarah's mom put her hand over her mouth in shock. Sarah started crying and saying it wasn't what it looked like, that she'd been drunk and it didn't mean anything. She said she loved me and it was just a stupid mistake. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled up the screenshots of the group chat messages on my phone and read them out loud. Everyone heard Jessica coordinating the cover-up, Sarah asking everyone to stick to their lies, and the other bridesmaids expressing guilt about deceiving me. The room erupted. Sarah's dad started yelling at her about how she could do this to such a good man. My mom was crying. Jessica was trying to defend herself, saying they were just trying to protect everyone from getting hurt unnecessarily. Sarah was sobbing and begging me to talk privately, saying she could explain everything. She said she loved me more than anything and that one stupid night shouldn't ruin our entire future together. But I was done listening to lies. I told everyone that the wedding was obviously canceled, and I apologized to all the family members who had traveled to be there. I said I'd hoped we could work things out privately, but Sarah had chosen to keep lying even when directly confronted. The next few minutes were complete chaos. Sarah was crying hysterically, begging me not to throw away 4 years over one mistake. Her mom was trying to comfort her, while also looking completely shocked and disappointed. Jessica was arguing with anyone who would listen, saying I was being cruel and vindictive. My parents came over to support me, saying they were proud of me for standing up for myself. My dad shook Mike's hand and thanked him for being a good friend. Several of Sarah's relatives came up to apologize to me, saying they were horrified by what they'd seen. The wedding coordinator was standing in the corner looking uncomfortable, probably wondering if she should start making cancellation calls. The banquet hall manager appeared and asked if we still wanted to proceed with dinner, which would have been funny if the situation weren't so awful. Sarah's dad pulled me aside and said he was deeply sorry for his daughter's behavior. He said he'd raised her better than this and couldn't understand how she'd made such terrible choices. He offered to pay for any cancellation fees or expenses I'd incurred, which was generous but unnecessary. Jessica was still trying to control the narrative, telling people that everyone makes mistakes and that I was being unforgiving. A few of Sarah's friends seemed to agree with her, but most people were clearly on my side. Rachel came up to me and said she was glad I'd found out the truth before the wedding. Sarah eventually stopped crying long enough to try one more approach. She said she understood I was hurt and angry, but couldn't we postpone the wedding instead of canceling it completely? She said she'd do anything to make it up to me. Counseling, therapy, whatever I needed. I told her that the problem wasn't just the cheating, it was the lying and the cover-up. I said I could potentially forgive a drunken mistake, but I couldn't forgive the calculated deception that had followed. She'd looked me in the eye for 3 days and lied repeatedly, even while talking about honesty and trust. My mom suggested that everyone should probably head home and let Sarah and me figure things out privately. But I said there was nothing left to figure out. I'd made my decision, and I was sticking with it. Most people started leaving around 8 o'clock. Both families were staying in hotels, so they gathered their things and headed out. Several people hugged me on their way out, saying I'd done the right thing even though it was painful. Sarah's mom was the last to leave. She hugged me and said she was sorry for everything. She said she'd always liked me and had been excited to have me as a son-in-law. She hoped I'd find someone who deserved me and treated me better. After everyone left, it was just Sarah, Jessica, Mike, and me in the empty banquet hall. Sarah made one final plea, saying she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me if I'd give her another chance. She said the guy from the club meant nothing to her and that I was the only person she'd ever truly loved. I told her that if she'd really loved me, she wouldn't have cheated in the first place. And if she'd really respected me, she wouldn't have lied about it afterward. I said I deserved better than someone who would betray me and then coordinate a cover-up with her friends. Jessica finally spoke up and said I was being self-righteous and cruel. She said everyone makes mistakes, and real love means forgiving each other. I told her that real love also means not putting your partner in a position where they need to forgive cheating and lying. Mike and I left the banquet hall around 9 o'clock. Sarah and Jessica stayed behind, probably planning their next move or figuring out how to handle the fallout with their families. The next few weeks were a blur of canceling vendors, returning gifts, and dealing with the emotional aftermath. I'd taken a week off work to handle all the logistics and give myself time to process everything. The hardest part was dealing with well-meaning friends and family members who kept asking if I was sure I'd made the right decision. A few people suggested that maybe I'd been too harsh, that everyone deserves a second chance, especially after 4 years together. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered how easily Sarah had lied to me. It wasn't just the cheating that bothered me. It was the realization that she was capable of such calculated deception. If she could lie so smoothly about something this big, what else might she lie about in the future? Mike was incredibly supportive throughout everything. He helped me return the tuxedos, cancel the honeymoon reservations, and deal with all the practical stuff I was too emotionally drained to handle. He never once suggested I should reconsider my decision. About 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, I got a long email from Sarah. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking and wanted to take full responsibility for her actions. She admitted that cheating on me was wrong, and that lying about it afterward was even worse. She said she'd broken up with Jessica as a friend because she realized Jessica had been a bad influence on her. She claimed she'd started going to therapy to figure out why she'd made such destructive choices. She ended the email by saying she still loved me and hoped we could eventually find a way back to each other. I didn't respond to the email. Part of me appreciated that she was finally being honest, but it felt like too little, too late. The damage was done, and I couldn't imagine ever trusting her again. My apartment felt weird without Sarah's stuff everywhere. We'd lived together for 2 years, and suddenly having all that space to myself was both liberating and lonely. I started redecorating and making the place feel more like mine instead of ours. Work was a good distraction. My coworkers were supportive without being pushy about details. A few people asked what had happened, and I just said we'd realized we weren't compatible for marriage. I didn't feel like getting into the whole story with casual acquaintances. About a month after everything happened, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. She said she'd felt terrible about the whole situation and was glad I'd found out the truth before the wedding. She told me that Sarah had been calling her trying to get her to reach out to me on her behalf, but Rachel had refused. Rachel said she'd learned a lot about friendship and loyalty from the whole experience. She said she'd never again stay quiet when she knew someone was being deceived, even if it meant causing drama or losing friends. I appreciated Rachel's honesty, both during the crisis and afterward. It reminded me that there were still trustworthy people in the world, even if Sarah hadn't been one of them. About 3 months after the canceled wedding, I was feeling more like myself again. The initial shock and hurt had faded into a duller sadness, but I was starting to see the whole experience as a learning opportunity rather than just a tragedy. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual coffee dates and dinners with women I'd met through friends or dating apps. It was strange getting back into the dating world after being in a serious relationship for 4 years, but also kind of exciting. One Saturday morning, I was at my favorite coffee shop reading when someone sat down at the table next to me. I looked up and saw Sarah. She looked different, thinner, more tired, but also somehow more genuine than she'd seemed in the months before our canceled wedding. She asked if she could talk to me for a few minutes. I was hesitant, but curiosity got the better of me. She said she'd been hoping to run into me somewhere, because she had some things she wanted to say. She told me she'd been in therapy for the past 3 months and had learned a lot about herself. She said she'd realized that her relationship with Jessica had been toxic, and that Jessica had encouraged her worst impulses instead of helping her be a better person. Sarah said she'd also realized that she'd been taking our relationship for granted. She said she'd gotten comfortable with the idea that I'd always be there no matter what she did, which had made her careless with my feelings and our trust. She apologized again for cheating on me, but more importantly, she apologized for lying about it afterward. She said the cover-up had been worse than the original betrayal because it showed she didn't respect me enough to be honest, even when caught. I listened to everything she had to say, and I could tell she was being genuine this time. There was no manipulation or attempt to get me back. She seemed to genuinely understand what she'd done wrong and why it had been so hurtful. She said she wasn't asking for another chance because she knew she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. She just wanted me to know that she was sorry and that she was working to become a better person so she wouldn't hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt me. Before she left, she said she hoped I'd find someone who deserved me and treated me the way I should be treated. She said I'd taught her what real love and commitment looked like, and she was grateful for that even though she'd thrown it away. After she left, I sat there for a long time thinking about our conversation. I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Sarah's apology didn't change what had happened, but it helped me understand that she was capable of growth and self-reflection, even if it had come too late for us. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was actually grateful that I'd found out about her cheating before the wedding rather than after. Getting divorced would have been much more complicated and painful than calling off an engagement. Epilogue. It's been almost a year since everything happened, and I'm in a much better place now. I'm dating someone new, Emma, who I met through work. She's honest, straightforward, and has never given me any reason to doubt her integrity. We're taking things slow, but I'm optimistic about where things are heading. I learned a lot about myself through the whole experience with Sarah. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought, and that I'm willing to make difficult decisions when my values are at stake. I also learned to pay attention to red flags and trust my instincts when something feels off. The canceled wedding was expensive and embarrassing, but it was worth it to avoid marrying someone who didn't share my values about honesty and commitment. I'd rather be single than be with someone I can't trust completely. I still think about Sarah sometimes and hope she's doing well. I heard through mutual friends that she moved to a different city and is still in therapy. I genuinely hope she's learned from our experience and will treat her next partner better.